Welcome to K-Pastors Roundtable. I'm your host, Alex. Today, I'm continuing my discussions with the Dr. Timothy Lee. He is currently fellow at UCLA Hospital. Now being a fellow, where do you hope to go from, after actually finishing the fellowship at the UCLA?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the fellowship is a very new fellowship. Mm-hmm. There have only been 4 classes so far. And because it's so new, there aren't specific job careers description after the fellowship yet. Okay. A lot of the fellows who go into it initially thought that they would become what is called a Chief Medical Information Officer.
Oh, okay.
That is a position, like an executive level position, where they're kind of in charge of the technology aspect of the healthcare in the organization, things like the electronic record, making it better, optimizing it, data and reports and things like that. But it's not limited to that. There are many opportunities in private industry. We have a colleague who graduated a couple years ago who went to work for Google in the Google Health sector.
Oh, okay.
People who are working for private companies or startups like that to do an integration of healthcare and new technology. Mm-hmm. There are nonprofits and foundations like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation who are using technology to decrease the disparities in healthcare across the world. And so they do things like educating other governments on how to collect, utilize technology, and then analyze data to decide on their healthcare policy. Okay. So things like that. There are many different iterations of it, but it's really up to the individual. And this is kind of where it is a cool time and cool space to be in this field, because it really is the sky's the limit. It's your future in this field is only limited by your ability to dream, your capacity to envision the future. Okay. So things like that. There are many different iterations of it, but it's really up to the individual. And this is kind of where it is a cool time and cool space to be in this field, because it really is the sky's the limit. It's your future in this field is only limited by your ability to dream, your capacity to envision the future, and your drive to go out and seek it. And so for me, particularly, it's my vision for God and missions. Mm-hmm. What will I limit myself to based on that? And do I have the faith to step out into these different fields that are not typical medicine? Mm-hmm. So many doctors, they get their degree, they finish residency and fellowship, and they just want to go practice full time. Okay. I don't envision that for myself. Okay. I would like to practice a little bit to keep my clinical skills, but I do believe that God has called me to maybe something different, something a little bit different, a slightly different path. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, the fellowship sounds like is the UCLA. They're innovative in the sense, or pioneering this field, and they want to make a footprint in this field.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there are a few, I would say, centers of kind of hubs of this informatics field, like the Pacific Northwest, where OHSU, UW, and then there's like Northern California. Obviously, they have UCSF and Stanford who are working with organizations like Google and other startups. Mm-hmm. And here in West LA, at UCLA and Cedars-Sinai, particularly those West LA academic hospitals, are very interested in pioneering digital health, and so and startup culture and trying to create healthcare innovation. So yes, I think you're correct that there are a few centers, and UCLA just happens to be one of them. Mm-hmm. They're actually one of the most wired hospitals in the nation, and they're very interested in trying to be at the cutting edge of healthcare technology.
Now, in your path from young boy to becoming a doctor and now a fellow, has Christianity been a hindrance in some ways, or situations where you had to make a choice, being a Christian versus maybe a path that you didn't want to take? I'm not sure whether you would actually run across that kind of situation, because being in the medical field, sometimes you have to become like God, in terms of making a decision.
Sure.
And so somebody that's always professed to be a Christian, sometimes it's not easy making that decision like God's decision of, say, this will happen to you, or this disease is headed this way, and you have no hope, or you have hope, or, So sometimes doctor will play their role. In some ways, they don't want to play their role, but that's reality. And so
Sure.
have you ever run across a situation where you had to make a decision or take a path that you felt uncomfortable?
I think that it's inevitable that we're going to come up against situations where we're uncomfortable as Christians. And I would say that in every situation that has come up across, my path, Christianity has always been, at the end of the day, has always been a help and not a hindrance.
Oh,
and
okay.
my faith is my drive. My faith is my source of strength, and my faith is my hope for the future. So in every capacity, in every way, the gospel is central. And the way that comes out is that whenever a difficult decision comes by my plate, or a tough situation ethically, I must, and I have to, and I've learned this over time and time again, that I have to operate out of faith in the gospel. That the Lord is sovereign, and that He is all-knowing and all-powerful, and that all I can do as a doctor is my best, and that He takes care of everything. And being a doctor is not, for me, my identity, nor do I think of it as the end goal. I don't I do the healing. I feel that God does the healing. I am just a conduit of it, that I'm a vessel for anything in terms of what God is going to do. Because ultimately, life and medicine is not about just curing people. It's about, being a doctor is about being a vessel for compassion and love to other humans. In our case as Christians, it's to be a vessel for God's love through the showing and the giving of love, compassion through medicine. And so that comes across in many situations where, a doctor may have a hard time about helping a patient decide whether or not they should take a medication that might save their life or not, but it could lead them to have pain or discomfort if they take it, or if they want to go naturally, quote unquote naturally. And a lot of life and death decisions like that, I feel many doctors will sometimes take it upon themselves to act as God. But for me, it's been always clear to me, just because that's too much pressure on myself to claim someone's life or death,
Right.
to make decisions for their life or death. I always like to make a decision with my patients. So I like to explain what's going on. I like to help them understand what their options are, and then make a decision together. Because ultimately, it's about letting them have the dignity of their own will. And my job is to, when possible, save lives, but always to give people options. And I can't dictate God's will.
Right.
Because I'm not an oracle. But what I can give is the wisdom and the love that He has put in me. And so my job, I feel, is in those difficult situations, such as life and death, always just to come alongside patients and families. In terms of ethical dilemmas, sometimes there are situations where, there are situations in medicine where you, as a Christian, may not feel comfortable.
Right.
For example, like in training, when we had to learn about abortions and giving abortions, there's always an option to say, based on my faith, I don't feel comfortable doing a surgical abortion.
Oh, okay.
And that was, a situation in my own residency. But I do feel that if we are excellent in our standing with those who are not Christians, when we give our best, and when we are clearly a person of love and not judgment, and a person of serving and justice, and not the opposite of pride and ego, people tend to respect that. And so when you say something like, I don't feel comfortable giving surgical abortions, if possible, I'd rather do a different learning experience. When you have created for yourself a reputation as an upright person of character, who is kind, compassionate, and metes out justice, typically people will respect the things that you say.
Oh, okay.
And so I found that even though those were sometimes sticky situations, by trying my best and always doing things out of, to the best of my ability, love and compassion, a lot of times those situations would end well.
Today, I'm with Dr. Timothy Lee. He is currently a fellow at UCLA Hospital. And then throughout your career as a doctor and residency and all that, do they prohibit you from speaking as a Christian to the patient or let your religious preference be known to the patient, or do they not discourage you, or?
Well, I would say that they don't encourage it.
Okay, okay.
And generally, yes. In my medical education, they have not directly discouraged, but basically said, that the office is, the clinic room is not necessarily the time for you to be sharing your faith.
Right.
But what I have found is that when patients themselves ask, or when they themselves, could obviously benefit from an acknowledgement of your faith for them, with them, a shared faith, that I found that it's always been very encouraging for both parties.
Okay.
And that I haven't shied away from that. So if a patient comes to me and says, my pastor so-and-so says this about, just for example, my depression or anxiety, or that, my church group, is coming alongside me with that, could you pray for me? I feel in those situations, it is my duty as a doctor, if I'm going to be what we call a doctor, in giving out compassion and love, to say, I will pray with you. That I stand with you and that I acknowledge your faith. I have a similar faith in my own. And that allows a building of rapport, that we can build a connection. And so I don't believe that they discourage that.
Okay.
And so I think when appropriate. I don't go into a clinic room and evangelize. I don't proselytize. That's absolutely discouraged.
Okay. Well, now, my other question is for you is this. What kind of advice would you give to someone that's young, 14, 15, 16, encourage them, they're thinking of going into career in medicine.
Sure.
What kind of advice can you give to the young people today?
I would say find a mentor, go out and get some experience, shadow a doctor, go on a medical mission trip, and really try to see firsthand what it looks like to be a doctor, because it's not for everybody. It is a grueling path.
Yes.
It is terribly hard. It demands the best years of your life, quote unquote. All of your 20s are taken up by training, education.
Right.
And some people love it. I know it's weird. Some people love that hardship of education and training because they just enjoy the process. Some people hate it and they burn out. And so the reason why I would caution people to make sure that they really think about, pray about, and consider wisely if they're going into medicine is because right now it is a time in the culture of medicine where people are very cynical, very jaded, and there are many physicians burning out.
Yeah.
It's to an epidemic proportion. But I will say there is joy in doing what God calls you to do. There are moments, obviously, when I'm tired, I'm busy, it's hard. But I always lean back, and even in those moments of hardship, I can say, I felt called by God to do this, and I can keep going in hope. And not many people can say that about their jobs.
Right.
But I do really recommend that people feel called to it, because at the end of the day, all we can do in life is live by conviction. And, things may look hard or come up, and they come up and down. They go back and forth. The winds and the waves, right? But one thing I've learned is that if we have a conviction, a sense of calling, we can weather almost anything. So do whatever it takes to seek that conviction and calling. What I mentioned experiences, but yes, through prayer as well. I prayed so much, many like all-nighters and praying at a keto on the mountains, going away and just seeking the Lord.
Now, what kind of hobby do you have? I mean, from your description, it sounds like you don't have any time for doing anything else other than being a doctor.
Well, I do have my own particular hobbies. Obviously, as I mentioned, I love music. So I play a couple of instruments, particularly guitar, drums, and piano. Wow. And so I do that when I really need to relieve stress. I just get away with my guitar and I just worship on my own. That's actually it's both a hobby and a stress relief.
Okay.
And a way to obviously build my relationship with God. Another thing is I love running. So, yeah, I run at least a few times a week because there are these moments where it's so busy and it's so distracting to be at home with your computer, with your phone. And I find some of my best meditation and some of my best prayer times are actually while I'm running. So I'll run like 3 or 4 miles, like 40, 50 minutes, and just clear my head, pray. And then finally, one of my favorite things to do is actually to get out in nature.
Oh, okay.
So I like hiking, camping. Me and my wife just went to Yosemite last week.
Oh, really?
Yeah. We both love communing with God in nature. We find that nature is an expression of God's, glory and love to us and beauty. So it's just one of my favorite things to do.
Wow. Well, it sounds like at least the hobby part, you have it down. Now, are you involved in the church because you play the music?
Well, I used to be. So I used to be on the worship team when I was in college, but in medical school and residency, there's not much time. In medical school, I was the vice president of the Christian club, and then in residency, I helped out with one of our small groups at our church. That was probably the extent of the involvement that I could get in.
Right.
On the side, I have been involved with a nonprofit organization. It's called The Meeting Place. It's a local, with a regional impact nonprofit that does a prayer meeting monthly and daily prayer time. So for anybody who's out there like wanting just a prayer time, they can go from like 7 to 9 at a space in God's image where they just have open prayer.
Oh.
It's just non-denominational. It's just open prayer time. But the vision that we had, so I serve on the board in that capacity. I'm serving, but my friend, the minister, and his staff are doing a lot of the daily work, the hard work. I just come in and give my input. But I think that's the trick. It's finding ways to serve where you can in whatever capacity that you can. But I always recommend that people should serve in some way. So for me now that I moved to LA just not even half a year ago, my wife was already serving in the children's ministry, and so I kind of got married into the children's ministry.
Okay. You play like puppets?
No, we help on the administration too. So like we welcome people, we sign the kids in, things like that. It's a lot of fun. I love meeting the children. Yeah.
Well, I mean, everything you have described as a Christian growing up and also being a doctor gives a lot of hope. And so I want to go back to the part of your information gathering for the health reasons for your fellowship. You mentioned about disseminating the data and things like that. There's always legal issues involved in collecting data and then trying to share those data. Is there particular problems in the areas of sharing the data with the outside source?
Oh, absolutely. So obviously, one of the highest priorities for any organization, any country is security and privacy for patient information, and so sharing data is incredibly difficult.
Right.
But there are new strides in order to de-identify patient data and just give the information about the disease processes or things like that, and to get that at a large level. So there are new movements to try to make that happen. And I'm not particularly concerned about sharing data. I'm more interested in how to teach other organizations, countries, how to collect, analyze, and report data. How to use data to actually help people. To make it so that it's not just numbers, but to see numbers as a way to serve. And so that's my interest. There are a lot of issues with data sharing, but if it's, for example, if you go to a foreign country and help them with their data, then they can collect it at their national level and meet all the criteria to make sure that the data is kept safe and secure, as opposed to like if I went and shared the data with another country. So that's not really my goal. It's more just working with other organizations.
But you have to understand the data when you collect them, like trends and what's coming up ahead and things like that.
Right.
It's, as you say, it's still pioneering area, and so is it still like in computer world every 6 months new technology comes in? Is it true in that sense?
Oh yeah,
what
absolutely.
you're doing?
You're exactly right. So there is that law that in technology doubles 18 months, but in data it's more than exponential. We have gotten to the point where it's billions of data, like trillions of data points, and more is being collected. So what happened is that electronic health records, computerized health data, began to skyrocket in use because of the changes that happened with the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. Because part of the stipulation was that people would, healthcare organizations would use electronic records. When that happened, it was a gigantic boom in healthcare data. And that increase of data doesn't necessarily mean an increase in understanding.
Right.
Because a lot of that data was done, collected in a way that was not uniform. So it wasn't standardized. And so you had to think, okay, what is actually useful in these gajillions of data points? What does that actually have any meaning of? And so that's the new challenge. So that's the frontier and pioneering of healthcare data. It's how to make meaning of the massive input of this healthcare data. And so that's kind of one of my interests, is like how to make sense of, how to use, and how to appropriately collect healthcare data to make changes, to use that data as a resource to actually help people. Yeah. So it's kind of, for anybody listening, it sounds like, wow, how did he get from going on a medical mission trip to this? But yeah, it's been only in the past few years that I felt God was really leading me towards this, and it was kind of a stretch. I wasn't sure what to make of it, but yeah, I do sense that this is the future. Yeah.
Now, since you gone to mission trips since you're young, is there upcoming planned mission trip for you and your wife, or?
Actually, no. For the first time in my life, I've been going on mission trips almost every year since I was 11. And only in the past year it was one of the first times I didn't go on a mission trip. Because even in residency, I went on mission trips.
Right.
Yeah. I think you remember that. This past year, I think it's really been about, I think the word has just been planting roots.
Okay.
So even in my own community, planting roots and seeing missions not so much as a place, but a perspective. That, missions does not mean I go out and go abroad, but missions means that I have a stance in my heart where I'm going to be missional. And so trying to do that in our church community. Our church just acquired another church where they had a very robust mercy ministry, where they fed the homeless population in the community. And finding ways in my own free time and job to serve people who I felt are marginalized and underserved. So the clinic that I work at part-time is an FQHC, which is a federal designation for underserved community. And trying to find ways, even in my work, to serve and to be in line with the calling that God gave me to serve the underserved. Yeah. And so I think that's what will be on the docket for the next maybe year or two. And if the opportunity comes, I'm not going to, reject it if we can. But, getting married, being married for the first year, definitely want to build a foundation of our marriage so that we can go out into the world and to serve together in that capacity.
Well, I mean, many people have misnomer about mission, because mission doesn't necessarily mean you have to go foreign country to serve. You can do it within the city, within your neighborhood, things like that. It doesn't matter where you are, as long as you're able to share, the good news. That's the mission trip. So
that is the mission. Yeah.
I wish you all the best, Dr. Lee, and thank you for your time today.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
The meeting place Dr. Lee spoke about, their website is www.themeetingplacetmp.org. This is what it says. What is the Meeting Place TMP? The Meeting Place is a prayer and training center that aims to catalyze a move of God in Southern California by raising up God's mighty army who makes God's name known where they are. Our heart's desire is to provide a space for the hungry and broken to come and meet with God through prayer, praise, and proclamation of God's word. We also desire to be a launching pad where people will be trained and equipped to further God's kingdom wherever God has placed them. Inspired by Psalm 63, we believe that there are hundreds and thousands of people in Southern California who are yearning to be in the presence of God. In this psalm, David expresses his hunger, thirst, and yearning for God. David is thirsting after the presence of God as he journeys through the wilderness, fleeing from his son Absalom. TMP is for those people who feel that they may be in the wilderness, but yet have a deep thirst and longing for God. TMP is also for broken people. It is for people who are broken by the hardships of life and need a touch from God. There are some things in our lives only a touch from God can heal. The Samaritan woman, crushed by her broken relationships with men, found her healing in Jesus, the living water. Earthly things have left many people dry and broken from life, and only an encounter with Jesus can bring them to life. TMP is for those two types of people, the hungry and the broken. We invite you to join us if you are hungry for the things of God or are broken and need a touch from God. The meeting place currently meets at Rock Church, located at 295 East Orange Thorpe Avenue, Anaheim, California, 92801, on first Monday of each month at 7 p.m. Next meeting is on November 4th. For further details, please visit website www.themeetingplacetmp.org. Once again, the word is themeetingplacetmp.org. I hope you will join them if you want to pray or praise. And they don't care which church you belong to or you haven't been to church in a while. It's simply to gather to worship and praise. I hope you will take advantage of the meeting place. This is what God says about prayer. Book of Ephesians, chapter 6, verse 18. New International Version Bible says, "And pray in the Spirit on all occasions, with all kinds of prayers and requests. With this in mind, be alert and always keep on praying for all the Lord's people." Amen. If you need something, if you need help, if you want to ask something to God, prayer is only way. I hope you will join them. This interview with Dr. Timothy Lee has been wonderful. He is our first and many more to come of someone that is Christian who has succeeded in their field. If you know of anyone, or if you want to hear from someone that you feel is successful in their life, I hope you will let me know so we can interview them also. Thank you. K-Pastors Roundtable is a discussion program for today's English-speaking Koreans and Christians. We will discuss the current issues and important issues dealing with our community. Your participation is very important to us. You can send in your questions or comments via email kprt316@gmail.com. You can hear our program on AM 1190 in Southern California on Saturday and Sunday at 1:30 p.m. You can also find us on YouTube channel K Pastors Round Table. Please join us. Thank you.